Hello everyone, this is Ihsan, Head of Quant Research at OpenBB. Today is January 27, 1:25 in New York, and we want to do a series of demos and tutorials about how to use OpenBB and how it can help you during the earnings season that's going on in the United States. So what I want to do in this demo is take a look at some of the stocks that are going to be announcing today and throughout this week, make a watch list out of it, pick an interesting stock that's announcing today and use that as my example. So we're going to build up some knowledge, bring some data, some of the data sets that's available out of the box at OpenBB. I'm going to also give some examples of creating a custom backend for some interesting data that you might be using that you have proprietary access to. I already put together my watch list of companies that I find interesting that's going to be announcing. This is a watch list that comes pre-populated with some data from financial modeling prep. So it allows you to screen for some performance, market cap. But let's just show you step by step how you would put together something like this. There's a couple different ways you can go about it. So one of them I wanted to show today was the earnings calendar widget from Quarter. This is a newly integrated widget. You can filter for the week or specific days, let's say. So it's going to give you a nice list of day by day who's going to be reporting. You can add this to context, maybe merge with some other data to create some interesting filter for which stocks you would like to pay attention. Another way is you can just cheat and ask the web. So in this case, let's just say for today, I'm interested in figuring out what would be some stock to focus on. So if you include that web in front of the prompt, we use Perplexity under the hood to do a web search. So here's a list of stocks. I'm interested in, let's say, for Starbucks. I believe the Starbucks is going to be announcing later today. Let's just confirm at what time Starbucks is expected to announce today. So 5 p.m. Eastern, it's not even 2 p.m. yet, so we have some time to go analyze this stock. So I'm going to use this as my example. Okay, so let's start our analysis by doing a performance analysis, how the stock has been doing relative to some benchmark. So to do that, first, I'm going to add some historical stock prices based on some of the things that I've been repeatedly using in my widget library. So I'll say add widget. So now I got some price data from financial modeling prep. I'm going to add this to context. So I can use the GUI to figure out what I want, but let's say I just want to use the Copilot to do some of these steps for me. So I'm going to say fetch historical price data on Starbucks and SPY by using this widget. I want daily close prices starting from 2020, make a table for these two tickers side by side, and I want values to be daily close prices. So let's see what it does. So here's a plan. So I can see the logic that it is processing. So it's accessing widget twice. It's using the symbol, start date. So it's essentially using this widget at the background to fetch the data. So let's see how things look. So I've retrieved the data, and this is how it looks. Excellent. So the sample makes sense. So there you go. So this is the full data that I'm interested in. So I'm going to create a widget from this table because I no longer need the original one. I'm going to keep it in my dashboard just in case I want to plot something directly with Starbucks. But this is what I would like to have. So I can plot this, but obviously it's not very helpful since this is not really an index. They start at different points. So let's just add this to context. And I've dealt with creating indices before, so I created some prompts. I engineered them. I know they work. So we use this prompt library option here where I can save some of my prompts that I just want to repeatedly use. So you can access them by pressing this light bulb button. So here's the prompt that I worked with before. So create a comparable index from this time series. Actually, forget that to the context, but it will probably work. So drop all the null values, divide each series by the first value, multiply by 100, and then make sure that each series starts at 100. So that's what I want to work on. Okay, so excellent. Looks like it has achieved what I was trying to do. Let's add this to my dashboard, and this is what I want to plot. Okay, let's make this a little larger, and now toggle for charting. So there you go. So this is a lot more better. So we actually now see that there is a divergence of, Starbucks and the broad index that we're using somewhere around 2023. So this stock has been underperforming the market by a wide margin, it seems. Okay, so now let's focus on valuation. So for valuation metrics, I'm going to be working with visible alpha data. So this is actually a pretty nice example of how to bring some proprietary data sets to OpenBB that you might have access to, but it's not available out of the box. In this case, I'm working with estimates data that I'm going to use for valuation as well as some sell-side estimates in context of guidance from visible alpha. So the way that you bring this type of data sets is this concept of backends. So what I have going on here is a bunch of fast API endpoints that I'm hosting locally. We make widgets using some boilerplate code that we make available, and you got full control over how you want to bring the data sets, how you want the controls, and so on and so forth. So let's just take a look at how my widget looks like. So in this case, I'm looking at Starbucks, and I looked at some peers that I think are relevant to compare Starbucks with. So I make a very custom widget using Visible Alpha as my data source. And we would like to thank them for graciously allowing us to use the data for demo purposes during the earnings season. So I'm looking at EV to EBITDA here, and part of the reason why I'm looking at that, especially that if you go back to earlier in 2020s, any of these price only type of metrics, you're going to see that they have some pretty wild volatility. It's going to make the charts a little hard to interpret, especially at the beginning of the series, and mainly because from the COVID closing and then reopening, these coffee shop or fast casual limited service restaurant and bars type of stocks, they've been hugely impacted for it. So I'm plotting here roughly the last 2 years of data in terms of their valuations. The stocks that I'm focusing on are all in some shape or form have coffee shop flavor to it, so to speak. So the Bros, Dutch Bros, it's a commonly mentioned competitor. This is Krispy Kreme. Lucky shows up in the context of competition in China. So the other ones are also coffee shops. I specifically included Chipotle because there's an interesting story behind that one. So if you're familiar with, the CEO, the latest CEO of Starbucks, let's just, if you're not familiar, just ask the web. He actually joined from Chipotle and has been credited for quite a successful tenure, like Brian Nichols, a quite successful tenure at Chipotle. So a lot of people have been essentially looked to him as a savior that would turn Starbucks more into, Chipotle. So just wanted to also compare if the Starbucks valuation, how does it compare to Chipotle? So if you look at this chart, especially around, the latest periods, in the coffee shop theme, you kind of see that, Starbucks is actually falling behind Dutch Bros for sure, but compared to the other ones, actually, they're not really underperforming. By some measures, actually, they're doing just fine. If anything, they seem to be slightly overvalued. So I'm looking at the PEG ratio based on 3 years. This is a very custom measure that you can basically get from excellent services like Visible Alpha. If you're not familiar with PEG ratio, just basically ask the internet how to think about it. So this is price to earnings ratio relative to earnings growth, and we're looking at 3-year earnings growth estimates here. So generally you would expect stocks to be around 1. Anything about 1 is roughly considered as overvalued. So you can read through the interpretations here. So Starbucks definitely has ways to go relative to Chipotle, and then definitely Dutch Bros. So they're definitely not the top performer in this fast casual coffee shop type of category.
But they're also still, beating the competition relative to some of the other comparable stocks. So you can make these things a bit more custom. So if you go to chart settings and set up, I actually pulled data for a bunch of other stocks. Like you can take a look at Shake Shack, which seems like a wild outlier. So maybe let's take a look at wings and whatnot. So you can make this a bit more interesting, go over the other. And you can also just switch back to the table view if you would like to manipulate data any further. Next up, let's drill down specifically into what kind of metrics the management has provided some guidance on, what are the key things that they highlight in their filings. So to do that, I brought the latest 8K the Starbucks has filed from their investor relation website. You can get it from SEC Edgar. Soon, actually, we're going to be able to give all of these documents to you in mission-readable format directly from Quarter. So I'm going to look up the transcripts from Quarter now, but 8Ks are not yet available. So in this case, I just manually drag and drop this document in. So basically, all that you need to do is add data and drag and drop your documents here. So this is their latest 8K. So let's add it to context. I'm interested in what are the things that they highlight, right? So it's fairly detailed, and you might be overwhelmed how to think about the stock. So the highlight section is actually very good shortcut, an entry point to understanding what drives the fundamentals of the stock. And the Copilot could be really helpful, essentially summarizing some of these things. This is a fairly common task, so I'm not going to rewrite the prompt from scratch. So I added this to my context. I already saved some of these things and engineered them in the past from my prompt library. So I'm going to basically run this. So just to say, let's summarize the highlights section. I want every metric that they're talking about. And you don't want to work with the chat text type of output. So I just want the table, metric, tell me what period, because typically you're going to see that they're going to talk about the quarter and the year. So I want to see the value, the units, and just some one-sentence summary, because sometimes, the language could be a little bit nuanced. So you might want to just, take a look to sanity check if the Copilot is doing a good job interpreting the numbers or not. So you see it's cracking the results in a nice table format. Let's just basically export this and put it into our dashboard. So let's just sanity check view of these things, right? The 7% number is global comparable store sales. So notice that this is the first thing that they talk about. So this metric is actually quite important. So I'm going to come back to this in the sell side estimates number. Global comparable same store sales declined by 7%, and so on and so forth. So you can go through the details here. So let's also talk about guidance, right? So the highlights are essentially reported numbers at the end of the day. So I'm also interested in what are some of the forward-looking outlook guidance type of statements that they provide. So I'm pretty specific in my prompt because generally after a certain point in these filings, it becomes legalese and it becomes all about reporting tables and things of that nature. So I just want to give it a bit more focused where I want you to look for this. And this is quite interesting, right? So the guidance for the stock has been suspended. And if you read through the reasons for it, let's just add it to our dashboard so we can read through it a bit more carefully. There's no guidance to start with. Like the guidance is actually suspended. So let's take a look at the earnings transcript, because I'm pretty sure that the analysts have asked questions about it, if they managed to get anything out of the CEO or the CFO about the suspended guidance. So let's take a look at Starbucks, latest quarter. Let's add this to context. I'm going to ask the same question. So let's just basically run the same prompt, but this time not on the 8K, but on this particularly this transcript. So let's see if they managed to get anything else in this case. So analysts most likely asked further questions, but they basically said that due to CEO transition, they're suspending all the guidance. So we can ask some further follow-up questions to the transcript, like did analysts ask about guidance nonetheless? And dig a little bit deeper whether they managed to tweeze something out, but it looks like both on the 8K and the subsequent earnings call, they were pretty firm about essentially we're not going to provide you any kind of guidance. Okay, so now we're moving on to estimates and continue drilling down into what is the sell side consensus on some of these key metrics that the company has been talking about. And mind you, it is 3:21, so this stock is going to announce in less than 2 hours, so we've got to be quick. So let's take a look at what Visible Alpha, in this case, is curated as some of the key metrics. So unfortunately, when you work across different types of vendor data, they might use slightly different language. It's fairly common in fundamental analysis. So if you scroll through here, there's a lot of metrics that sell-side models use, and they don't always line up exactly with what the company says in their official documents and whatnot. So Copilot is actually quite helpful when you're dealing with these type of discrepancies between different vendor data sets. So the guidance specifically call it for comparable sales. There is no comparable sales, but there's SSS. So I'm assuming throughout this demo that you're not familiar with the stock. So just ask the Copilot. So I have this comparable sales metric. I just add this to context and ask, what is the most likely metric comparable to comparable sales in this case? And it's going to reason its way through it, say that SSS stands for same store sales. And oftentimes it's the same thing as comparable sales. So this comes in several different flavors, and I have basically looking at 90-day prior consensus. So I pretty much set this to the day after the previous earnings announcement. So what were the estimates after the previous announcement, and what do they look like today, just ahead of the earnings announcement? So one thing that you notice is that in most cases, actually, the sentiment has soured on Starbucks. So things are not particularly looking good in terms of expectations, that they've already quite been tempered down. But let's focus on some of these key metrics and maybe go to filter, and I'm just going to filter it down to things that contain same-store sales. So just after the earnings announcement, the expectations were, there's some sort of growth was expected. So maybe some growth in US, but not so much, growth happening outside the United States. So that has changed quite a bit since the last earnings announcement, right? So let's just try to visualize this. So line chart is probably not our best friend here. So I'm going to go to chart settings, maybe do like a combination chart. So now that's a nice looking chart. So you kind of see that the consensus has changed on these three metrics quite a bit over the last 90 days. So just basically, here are the reported numbers, and then let's add the pre-announcement number to this and scroll it out. So you're actually seeing that, there's around COVID, things get quite wild, but over the last, let's just zoom in here, over the last couple quarters, it's not a recent phenomenon. The same-store sales has been slowing down for this company for some time, especially in the last 3 quarters or so. It actually has been going negative. So let's also take a look at perhaps the store numbers. So that's actually quite interesting. So despite the same-store sales going down, the company is still opening up stores. Let's maybe take a look at international stores. This is quite interesting because there's a lot of questions if you look at the earlier transcripts about the success of Starbucks outside the country and so on. So let's do a slightly different chart in this case. I'm going to go to, this would make sense more to add the surprise component. So let's just add it as a separate line perhaps, and then maybe make the announcement number as more like an area chart. The number of stores seems to be easier to predict. So generally the pre-announcement number is closely trailing the reported numbers. Like you see that the surprise component is typically less than like 1%. There was only like one period where there was, more than 2% surprise. So despite the slowing down sales internationally, much more so than the total and in the United States, you see that, the Starbucks is still keep adding stores at a, relatively brisk pace according to sell side expectations.